position was the equivalent of hanging from the top of the Empire State Building in the dark. As Solow gripped the shaft timbers, he also held tight to the carbide-burning lantern that every miner was required to buy. Though electric headlamps had been available since the turn of the century and were widely used in coal mines, carbide lanterns saw far wider use through the 1920s. Improvements to electric lamps in the 1930s would make them brighter and less heavy, but before then the weight of the batteries made them so bulky that miners didn't like to carry them. So, as Ernest Solow searched for the end of the ruined cable at 11:45 p.m., he held in his hand an open flame. Not even a pane of glass enclosed the fire. The environment could hardly have been more volatile. The fall of the giant cable had scraped away half of its lead sheathing, exposing large sections of the highly flammable oil-soaked cloth that insulated the wire. Boys who lived near the mines picked up scraps of this same type of electrical cable, stripping them to sell for the copper. The boys used their pocket knives to peel off the lead. To clean away the cloth, though, they simply touched it with a match. It burned like gasoline. Somehow, as Solow clung to the timbers, probing into the darkness, his lantern came into contact with the exposed cloth on the cable. It burst into flames. Reflexively, Solow recoiled his lantern arm, sparking a second set of flames behind him. "John!" Solow yelled to Baldy. "I got my lamp too close!" Baldy clambered around to Solow's position, and the two men worked furiously to stamp out the first set of flames. For an instant it seemed to work. But then, remembered Baldy, the fire immediately broke out in the cable on the opposite side. Furiously they flailed at this second outbreak, but the fire by now was taking on a life of its own. The flames spread rapidly through the tangled cable, the frayed wire like a 1,200-foot fuse. To make matters worse, the Granite Mountain shaft had a powerful downdraft. Under normal circumstances, air circulated down the Granite Mountain shaft, then traveled sideways through numerous crosscuts to its sister shaft, the Speculator. The spec, an updraft, drew the air back up to the surface. Air in this system moved at a breezy 200 to 300 feet per minute, making the Granite Mountain and Speculator shafts among the best ventilated in Butte. This circulation, normally beneficial, now turned deadly. In the initial moments after flames broke out, the Granite Mountain downdraft sucked the fire into the massive cable, then fanned the growing conflagration. Solow and Baldy, fearful for their lives, scrambled back in the cage, signaling the surface furiously to be lifted up to the 2,400 station. The cage responded at once, pulling them up 50 feet to the station. A blunt-faced, big-handed miner named Albert Cobb was one of several men working at the 2,400 that night. "I had just pulled out of the 2,400 of the Granite Mountain with a load of rock." Solow threw open the cage door and jumped out. Baldy, remaining in the cage, signaled the surface to pull him and the two other men to the top. The cage disappeared as Solow yelled desperately to Albert Cobb, "Give me a bucket, quick!" Another man in the station knocked the top off a 10-gallon drinking keg and carried it toward the shaft. The fire, though, was already far beyond buckets. "Before we could get over to the shaft," Cobb would later report, "the smoke was coming up in frightful fashion." The heat of the flames and the smoke they threw off reversed the Granite Mountain draft. The downdraft, which had initially sucked the fire downward, turned updraft. Now, pulled from above, the fire began to race up the half-mile of shaft above the 2,400 station, feeding on the tinder-dry, chemically treated timbers. Solow began to confront the enormity of his mistake. "For God's sake, get the men out!" he yelled. "Get 'em out!" Baldy Collins and the two other men reached the surface and piled out of the cage. The fire, they knew, would burn quickly up the wooden shaft. Speed was essential if they were to save the men working below. Desperate